Do you ever wonder what is intended for or likely to be understood by only a small number? The traditional beliefs, customs, and stories of a community. A community not part of the mainstream, unconventional, peripheral, or extreme. Part of an anthology, a published collection of poems or other pieces of writing. This is Esoteric Lore. I'm your host, Edward Aponte, where I push you to ponder the fringes of folklore. In a small mountain town called Julian, long before social media or microphones, a handful of neighbors gathered around a pot-bellied stove. They called it the Hot Stove Society, a place where miners, merchants, and dreamers claimed to solve the world's problems, one story at a time. They didn't change the world, but they changed how a community talked, listened, and stayed warm through long winters. Join Esoteric Lore as we explore the history and hidden meanings of Julian's Hot Stove Society and what it can still teach us about the art of conversation in a divided age. The Hot Stove Society of Julian, where warmth was the first word in wisdom. Welcome back to Esoteric Lore, where small town legends meet the historical record. Today we're climbing into the Cuyamacas, Apple Country, Old Gold, where a curious club once warmed its hands around a real potbelly and even hotter streams of stories. Julian, California's Hot Stove Society. If you've heard hot stove used for baseball's winter gossip, you're on the right track. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, hot stove became America's shorthand for off-season chatter. Local men gathered around the heat source, trading news, arguing politics, telling tall tales. Julian had its own version. We can still trace it on the ground today. Picture Main Street, Julian. Storefronts and miners turned merchants. One building in particular anchors the tale. The Wilcox Building, erected in 1872. It served as a general store, post office, stage stop, even a telephone exchange. Its owner, Horace Fenton Wilcox, didn't just sell dry goods, he presided over the town's Hot Stove Society, an informal gathering where locals spun yarn and solved the world's problems. That phrasing isn't mine, it shows up in historical summaries and plaques associated with the building. Where was this on Julian's Main Street? Julian's Hot Stove Society wasn't a formal, chartered club with bylaws. Think of it as a standing salon. Neighbors gather around Wilcox stove to talk mining, weather, politics, and whatever the weekly paper didn't or did print. Sources characterize it as a men's gathering that reached peak popularity around the turn of the 20th century. The tone, storytelling, debates, civic gossip, the social network of a mountain town before radio, let alone Wi-Fi. It's easy to hear the cadence. A miner's boots by the potbelly stove, a rancher's opinion about water rights, an argument over road funds punctuated by laughter when someone's tall tale outpacked and paced the snowbanks of Vulcan Mountain. The Hot Stove Society of Julian was remembered as an informal circle of town folk, mostly men who gathered in Horace's Wilcox General Store around the potbelly stove to swap stories, debate politics, and, quote, solve the world's problems. That last phrase shows up in local marker, texts, and tourism write-ups. But it's meant tongue-in-cheek. The idea was that their conversations, they imagined solving everything from mining disputes to international affairs, but their influence didn't extend beyond Main Street. In other words, they were practicing the old age frontier pastime of talking big around the stove. Their discussions probably helped shape local consensus on roads, schools, or community projects, but there's no historical evidence they actually resolved the world's problems. The phrase solving world problems is part of the folklore that keeps their gathering alive in memory, rather than a literal record of achievements. So after all this history, the obvious question is, what does a little mountain town hot stove society have to say to us now, when our civil and political discourse feels more like a brush fire than a cozy circle? In Julian, the stove was more than heat. It was a center. People gathered because there was warmth and welcome. Today, maybe our stoves are community centers, moderated forums, or even digital circles where the ground rules are kindness. Without a heat source, we scatter. With one, we can circle in. Those Julian men told stories, jokes, tall tales, arguments. They heard each other's voices. Contrast that with today's text-only flame wars. A human voice softens edges. Hearing tone, laughter, or even frustration reminds us this is a person, not just pixels. Bringing more storytelling and voice into our conversation humanizes the debate. The Hot Stove Society was a low-stakes rehearsal hall. People battered around world problems in playful ways. Nobody passed laws by the stove, but everybody sharpened their thinking. Maybe we need more of that today. Civic sandboxes where ideas can be tested without the fear of instant polarization. Playful spaces breed serious readiness. Tall tales, exaggerations, humor ran through the Hot Stove Society. That laughter builds bonds. Today we need more humor, more satire, and storytelling in our discourse. Not to dismiss problems, but to remind us not every conversation has to be trench warfare. Sometimes a laugh clears more space than an argument. Those Julian citizens talked big about world problems, but in truth, they were mapping the world onto their valley. That's a lesson. When we talk politics, start local. Frame global issues through the lens of our water, our schools, our family. Anchoring the abstract makes it real. So, what can the Hot Stove Society teach us? That maybe discourse isn't about instant solution. It's about gathering, warming together, and keeping the conversation alive. We don't need every debate to end in agreement, but we do need every citizen to feel invited into the fire. The Hot Stove Society of Julian may not have solved the world's problems, but it modeled something we desperately need. A culture of proximity, play, and warmth. Maybe the world's problems don't get solved until we learn how to sit together, shoulder to shoulder, and talk. As always, I leave you with a poem, At the Stove's Edge. In a mountain town the stove once glowed, where miners, dreamers, talkers flowed, not to solve the world entire, but to gather close around the fire. They argued, laughed, and made amends, the smoke above them thick with friends. No policy was ever cast, but warmth and listening held them fast. Now screens divide what heat once healed, voices flatten, hearts concealed. Yet still we can, if we desire, build modern hearth and tend the fire. For every age must learn anew, the world is mended when we do. If you like this video, please subscribe, share, and give us a thumbs up. Thanks for watching. See you next time.